Keith Richards was born on December 18, 1943 in Dartford, England. Life in post-war Britain was hard. Food was rationed, jobs were scarce, and most people lived simply. But Keith had something that made life brighter: music. His grandfather Gus played the violin and encouraged Keith to pick up the guitar. Keith fell in love with American blues. He listened for hours to Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, and Howlin' Wolf. Their raw sound spoke to him more than anything else. He would sit in his small bedroom trying to copy the riffs he heard on old records. His fingers hurt, but he kept going. Music became his escape. School didn't interest him much, but the guitar gave him purpose. He practiced until his style started to take shape. Even as a teenager, Keith had a rebellious energy. He didn't care about following rules. He cared about finding a sound that was his own. No one in Dartford could have guessed it, but this quiet boy would soon become one of the most influential guitarists in the world. In 1961, fate stepped in. On a train platform in Dartford, Keith saw Mick Jagger, an old schoolmate. Mick was carrying blues records from Chess Records in Chicago. Keith was shocked. Nobody else in their town cared about Muddy Waters or Chuck Berry. The two started talking and realized they shared the same dream: to bring American blues to British audiences. They began jamming together, often joined by Brian Jones, who also loved the blues. Soon, they had a band. Keith's guitar riffs were simple but powerful. Mick's voice brought fire. Brian's style added a unique edge. Together, they had something different from anything in Britain at the time. In 1962, that small group officially became the Rolling Stones. At first, they played tiny clubs in London. They weren't polished, but they were loud, raw, and dangerous. People loved it. The band quickly gained a reputation as the Bad Boys of rock and roll, an image that would follow them forever. That train station meeting between Keith and Mick was the spark that lit the fire of a band that would change music history. By 1963, the Rolling Stones were making waves. They wore scruffy clothes, had long hair, and refused to smile politely like other pop groups. While the Beatles looked clean and friendly, the Stones looked wild and rebellious. Fans who wanted something darker were instantly hooked. Keith was at the heart of their sound. He developed a rhythm-driven guitar style that was more about feel than technique. His riffs were sharp, unforgettable, and full of attitude. With songs like Satisfaction and The Last Time, Keith created the backbone of what people now call rock. The band's success grew fast. Girls screamed at their shows, parents worried about their influence, newspapers called them dirty and dangerous, but Keith loved it. He thrived on the chaos, the screaming crowds, and the freedom to play his guitar as loud as he wanted. For Keith, the early 60s were a dream. He wasn't just playing the music he loved, he was part of a cultural revolution. The blues he grew up admiring had found new life in the Rolling Stones, and Keith was leading the charge. By the late 60s, Keith Richards was becoming a guitar legend. His riffs were unlike anything else. He didn't care about flashy solos. Instead, he focused on rhythm, creating grooves that stuck in people's heads. His open G tuning became a secret weapon. With it, he wrote classics like Brown Sugar and Start Me Up. The sound was raw, simple, but powerful. Every chord had a punch. Fans and musicians alike recognized that Keith wasn't just playing guitar, he was reinventing how rock music could sound. But fame also came with temptations. Keith began experimenting with drugs. At first it was just part of the rock and roll lifestyle, but soon it became a dangerous habit. Despite this, he never missed a beat on stage. Many fans believed Keith played even better under pressure, almost as if the chaos fueled his music. The 60s were the time when the Rolling Stones cemented themselves as one of the greatest bands on earth, and Keith Richards, with his cigarette hanging from his lips and guitar slung low, was at the center of it all. The 1970s brought both triumph and trouble. The Stones were now global icons, but Keith's drug use grew heavier. He became famous for his wild lifestyle, never sleeping, always partying, and pushing himself to the edge. Police began to take notice. In 1977, Keith was arrested in Toronto for heroin possession. The charge could have sent him to prison for years, which might have ended the Rolling Stones for good. But thanks to lawyers, fans, and even other musicians, Keith avoided jail. Instead, he was given probation and ordered to perform a benefit concert. Through it all, Keith kept playing. The Stones released some of their most powerful albums in the 70s, including Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main St. Keith's riffs drove the music even when his personal life was in chaos. The world watched, wondering how long Keith could survive such a reckless lifestyle. Yet somehow he kept going, proving that he wasn't just a rock star, he was a survivor. Keith and Mick Jagger's partnership was at the core of the Rolling Stones. They called themselves the Glimmer Twelve. By writing most of the band's songs together. Keith would come up with riffs and Mick would craft lyrics. The mix was magic. But their friendship wasn't always easy. Mick wanted control while Keith lived for freedom. Arguments became common. Sometimes the tension fueled great music. Other times it nearly tore the band apart. In the late 70s and 80s, the battles got worse. Keith accused Mick of acting like a pop star instead of a rocker. Mick was frustrated with Keith's drug problems. Despite the fighting, they always returned to each other. Deep down, they knew that the world wanted the Rolling Stones, not Mick Jagger or Keith Richards alone. Their relationship has been compared to a marriage full of love, fights, and reconciliation. And like a marriage, it survived because neither could walk away completely. By the late 70s, Keith realized he couldn't keep living the same way. Drugs and alcohol had nearly destroyed him. He decided to fight back. Slowly, he began cleaning up his life. Quitting wasn't easy. Keith had been using for years, and the temptations were everywhere. But he found strength in his music, his family, and his determination to prove he could still perform at the highest level. Surprisingly, Keith's playing only got sharper once he sobered up. He still had the same edge, the same swagger, but with more focus. Fans noticed. The media, which once predicted his downfall, now celebrated his survival. By the 1980s, Keith wasn't just alive. He was thriving. Against all odds, he had beaten the lifestyle that had claimed so many other rock legends. As the decades passed, the Rolling Stones continued to tour and record. Keith became a symbol of endurance. No matter how much time passed, he remained on stage with his guitar, cigarette, and smile. Albums like Tattoo You and Steel Wheels proved that the Stones could adapt to new eras without losing their spirit. Younger generations discovered Keith and realized that his riffs were timeless. On stage, Keith was the heart of the band. While Mick danced across the stage, Keith stood steady, guitar in hand, driving the music forward. Fans didn't just see him as a guitarist, they saw him as proof that rock and roll could last forever. By the 1990s and 2000s, Keith Richards had become more than a musician. He was a legend. Stories about his wild past only added to the myth. People joked that Keith would outlive everyone, even the apocalypse. Yet behind the myth was a man who deeply loved music. Keith often said that he never wanted fame. He only wanted to play guitar. The rest just happened. He also spoke about his love for the blues, calling it the foundation of everything he did. In 2010, Keith released his autobiography, Life, which became a bestseller. The book showed his honesty, humor, and surprisingly deep wisdom. Fans got to see the real Keith, not just the wild rocker, but the thoughtful artist. Today, Keith Richards is seen as the ultimate rock survivor. He has lived through decades of fame, addiction, arrests, and near-death experiences, yet he's still here, still playing. With every tour, fans are amazed to see him walk on stage, guitar in hand, and deliver the riffs that changed music forever. Keith represents the spirit of rock and roll, rebellion, survival, and passion. He once said, "Music is a necessity. After food, air, water, and warmth, music is the next necessity of life." For Keith Richards, music wasn't just a career, it was survival itself. From a small boy in Dartford to one of the greatest guitarists of all time, Keith's story is proof that rock and roll isn't just music, it's a way of life.